Hello, it's me Austin, and if you're new to my channel, I am a designer with a passion for fashion and wardrobe arts. Now for the first episode, I will start by showing guys how I made the royal sword. This sword will be closely fashioned after the British Royal Navy sword. You might be wondering why I decided to make this sword and the whole costume to begin with. Well, it all started with this portrait of King George V on his coronation day. And I just found him so powerful, and for the lack of a better word, badass. It is because George V is the only king to wear this dark military style uniform in his coronation portrait. This portrait had led me to find other photographs of other famous male members of the royal family wearing the same style or similar style of uniform costume. Prince Philip on the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, George VI, the late Queen's father, and Colin Firth playing George VI in The King's Speech 2011, of which he won an Oscar for Best Actor in a leading role. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, aka George V, first cousin / doppelganger, and many others. And there is one thing in common in all of these photos: they all strutted a pose with this sword. So I thought to myself, if I want to create this entire look, I need to make the sword. So it's time to do a little bit of research on this sword. I will be talking about the rest of this uniform in upcoming episodes of the series, but for now, we will focus on just the sword. Don't confuse this sword with the katana, which is a different sword that is used at coronations of British monarchs. The sword I'm referring to is called the Royal Navy Officer Sword. This iconic sword was first introduced to the Royal Navy in 1827 and has been in service throughout many conflicts, including the 2 World Wars right up until today. It was adopted by all of the Commonwealth Navies in the British Empire and is still carried today as a dress sword. The brass hilt features a golden lion head pommel. The blade is made of high carbon steel and is tempered and decorated with etching. The wooden scabbard is covered with black leather and features decorated brass fittings and 2 suspension rings so it can hang from the sword belt, a part of the uniform. I definitely looked online for a lot of photos and specifications to use as reference. Many thanks to these websites that sell the real swords or very accurate replicas of the original. You can buy one if you're interested, but for me, I am simply too broke to afford them, so I gotta rely on my creative juice to make it. First, we're going to make the blade. Now, this is a plank of wood that I got from a local art supply store, and what type of wood it is, I'm not sure because they didn't tell me. Now, with a pencil, I sketched on the outline of the blade, and I actually used the dimension of the real sword, although mine is a bit shorter because I want to be able to pack this sword into the largest size suitcase. And actually at this point I was about to go to New Zealand and I didn't want to leave this sword at home. So this is how the outline of the blade looks. You can pause the screen to take a closer look at it. And now we're going to cut the shape out of this wood plank. So, I am not a carpenter. I don't have any power tools for woodwork. This is gonna be messy. I know I was doing this all wrong, and this saw is probably not the right tool. These 2 saws were the only saws in my toolbox at the time. I should have gotten one of these hand saws, but for some reason I didn't. Probably one thing, because I hadn't thought ahead of time to buy one. Or I was lazy. I was just trying to make it work in the best way possible because I thought it was just gonna be a quick process, which it was. You know, it's not like the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. The saw I was using wasn't even a saw. It didn't even have a handle. Like, God, I really was lazy, wasn't I? So this looks really wrong, I have to admit. But I didn't intend to make it look this way, okay? Because I know some people already don't appreciate my naughty jokes, my sexual innuendos, and some people love it, and some people just don't. But like, I just find it a little bit annoying that some people just find a problem with a silly thing like this, and they feel the need to leave a comment. You know, like, oh, I love your videos and I love your creation, but can you keep it down with the innuendos? This is like my humor. This is who I am. So if it's not your thing, just, you know, kindly move along. Now that the blade is roughly cut out, I can talk about the hilt of the sword. For the hilt, I'm going to use this wood that is called balsa wood, and it is the softest and lightest wood in the world. It's low density, and yet at the same time it is high strength, which is why it is commonly used in model making. So I cut multiple rectangles, and as you can see, this wood is so easy to cut in. And I stack these rectangles on top of each other, and I spread PVC glue on each of them, making sure that it's just a thin layer of glue so that it doesn't ooze out. Now I wrapped it up to keep, you know, the layers tight together, and I will have to let the glue dry overnight, which is the perfect time for me to go to bed, and we can continue tomorrow. Now that the glue has set, we can unwrap this Christmas present. Now the size of the blade is still very rugged, so we need to sand it down. And I'm going to use an array of different sandpapers in different grits. And I cut a piece and I tape it to a wooden block so that it is easier to grip, and it's also easier for me to apply firm pressure. I was actually so afraid that custom is going to make a big trouble out of this. You know, having a sword packed in your suitcase, technically a weapon. And then I would have to explain to them that it's just a custom sword. And God, how embarrassing that would have been. Luckily, that didn't happen in the end. Now that the edge is smooth, we need to chamfer this wooden block. Basically, that means we're going to add bevels to the edge of this wooden block so that it becomes a wooden blade. To achieve this, I hold the wood plank at a 20 degree to the table surface while keeping the sanding block parallel to the table. Then I strip the edge down with low grit sandpapers until a bevel is formed, gradually moving up to high grit sandpapers to smooth out the surface. After that is achieved, I flip the plank to the other side and repeat until a sharp edge is formed. This series is actually 3 years in the making, and it's not because it's actually taken 3 years to make, but because, like everyone else, I had to put this project aside multiple times for other life priorities. As for me, I was working hard to reach my dream of pursuing an education in New Zealand, and I finally made it after an entire year of a lot of stress. And now I am back after having lived there for 4 years, and I'm currently spending my vacation with my family back in my home countries, which means I finally got to sit down and talk with you guys and share this project that I've been dying to put out to the world. Now I move on to shaping the hilt of the sword. This is exactly why I use balsa wood, because it's so soft you can easily carve into it using just about anything, even sandpaper. And I used a round file to create these grooves along the hilt. And now we can move on to turning this blade from being wooden to being metallic steel. My instinct was to prime the object with black acrylic paint and then paint it with chrome finished spray paint. The result was decent, but ignore this, because this was before I got introduced to the wonderful world of gilding foil, thanks to Ho for leaving me this wonderful comment and idea. After the entire sword was finished, I ridded the blade by applying silver gilding foil, and I will talk about this more at the end of this project. Let's move on to making the guard of the sword. I use sheet brass. It's only 26 gauge, so you can easily use metal shears to cut it. So I cut out this shape of the guard, which kind of looked like a cobra head in it. It even has this tongue sticking out at the end. Oh no, I cut up the tongue. I did this to save space. Don't worry, I will attach it back later with screw. And the slot in the middle right there is for the blade to slide through. I use a utility knife to score the outline. And this is important, you want to leave an offset from the outline of the shape because we're going to trim the edge later, and that offset is needed for that. The slot was a bit tricky to cut in, so I had to use an awl to make multiple holes. Collectively, these holes become a coin slot, big enough for the blade to slide through. Now with a pair of flat pliers, I trim the edge of the guard. And this serves two purposes. First, it prevents the sharp edge from, cutting you. And second, it adds some thickness to the rim of the guard. Now the next thing that I did is chasing the brass sheet with a hammer. This will curve the brass sheet into a dome shape. It also adds this very interesting texture on the guard. The real sword had this very cool and intricate detail on the guard, which I have to admit I can't replicate simply by hand. This is a much simpler method, but it's still pretty regardless. Oh yeah, and I'm resting the brass sheet on a pile of modern clay so that I can hammer it. Now I just bend this long neck of this very shiny cobra around the wooden handle of this mallet. A water bottle is also very helpful for this part. Now for this tongue part of the cobra head, I roll it with a pair of round nose pliers. And I attach it back to the guard with screw. Before attaching the guard onto this sword hilt, I'm going to wrap the grip of the hilt. Now I use a small piece of PU leather that I actually cut from my own family chair. The real thing is actually wrapped in fish skin, woven with gold-plated copper wire. Sounds fancy? Well, we're going to use just PU leather for this. The color is not accurate, but I didn't really want to shuffle an entire roll of leather just for a small piece to wrap this grip, so don't hold me against this. So anyway, I hot glued the seam together. It was kinda messy, but that's alright. And then for the golden grooves, I use gold thread and just tie a few loops around this groove. It was actually 4 AM at the time that I was doing this part. And to be honest, I was hating this project a lot at that point. I was so tired. I had to finish this handle off camera. You know that point of any DIY art projects where you're no longer excited to make something as you were in the beginning. You are burnt out and regret even starting the damn project. Yeah, this is what I was feeling at the time. The grip is wrapped and now it's time to install the guard onto the hilt. I actually punch 2 holes at the beginning and at the end of this cobra brass so that I can nail the guard securely into the hilt. Don't pay attention to the weird little wood part that's sticking out. We're going to cut it off later. After the guard is installed, I took a look at it and it looked really off. It looked too big and too chunky, but I couldn't put a finger on it. Then I realized I got the shape all wrong. I wish I had seen these profile angles of the guard before I even cut out the brass. The guard is actually asymmetrical. It's slim on one side and only flares out on the other side to protect the hand. So I had to start over. Well, actually not really starting over, I just need to cut off one side of this guard. But I was really exhausted and frustrated. But it was too late to go back, so we have to carry on. I obviously looked like I'm struggling here, which I truly was. The curvature of the guard didn't give way to the scissors, so I really have to use a lot of tools like pliers to bend and roll the excess brass off of itself. If this footage makes you feel infuriating, just know that this is exactly what I felt at the time. After this day, my right arm was really fatigued, but thank God it is all over now. Oh yeah, and the hilt is also too long. Another element of this hilt is this brass part that wraps around the back of the hilt. This is quite simple to make. I just cut out this spoon shape, and as always, I need to crimp the edge. Then I curve the stem around the handle of a mallet so that it fits the contour of the sword hilt. A little fitting test. And just like the guard, I chase the end to add texture and to match the contour of the pommel. There's a lot of excess brass along this spoon area, so I trim it off camera. And once I'm happy with the shape, I can move on to making the lion head pommel. And of course I use balsa wood for this part. I just roughly sketch the silhouette on all sides of this balsa wood block, and I use a knife to carve out the general shape. And then I go in with a Dremel fit with a cone head drill bit to carve out the details of this lion head. The balsa wood is so soft, you could easily use a nail drill or an e-file for this part. By the way, I'm gonna sidetrack right here. You guys have any ideas how I can fill in these dead air moments? I feel like there are so many things I can talk about while the footage is playing. So yeah, leave me a comment if you think I should say something, like anything. If you have questions or just any random things you want me to say, I can do that. Or I could just shut up. Cause like sometimes I go on YouTube and I watch, some art video or DIY videos, and there are some people who are being really nasty about, just the creator, the artist, who wants to just make conversation while they're making their art. And they would be like, oh, you need to shut up, I just came here to see how you do it. And I don't give a shit about your personal life or whatever is going on with your life. I just need you to tell me how to do the damn thing and then shut the fuck up. So yeah. Luckily that haven't happened to me. Like, I really have the best audience in the world. Every time you guys leave me a comment about how you love my personality, my humor, and the silly stuff I put into my video, it makes me feel so happy and grateful. It really is what keeps me going, because since the beginning of this channel, it is not just solely about me creating these arts, or the instruction, or the tutorial. It's also an outlet for me to share a part of my identity, to connect with other fellow artists, which is why I always refer to you guys as my fellow obsessionists. So thank you to everyone who have supported me and left those amazing comments, and thank you for sticking around and watching this video. Similar to the blade, at first I spray painted this lion head pommel, but in the end, after the sword is finished, I apply gold lips on it instead. I will also get back to this with the blade at the end, because that's literally the order of the process. And now I can attach this brass back piece onto the hilt. And the spoon area actually support the lion head so that it wouldn't just snap off. But yeah, the other part was hot glue in. There's just a lot of hot gluing for this project. It seems a bit amateurish, but It really is the best method for a lot of things in this project. We'll cover up, these hot glue bits later with gold foil. I also cut out a strip of brass for the bend at the end of this sword hilt, and this part is actually called a ferrule. Now back to the hilt, a piece of leather actually ripped, and to my surprise, it revealed a white leathery layer underneath, and I just thought that is perfect. That actually looks like the real thing. So I decided to skin the whole thing off. It was quite a meticulous process. It's kind of like that meme, surgery on a grape. It's very that. And after that I apply a top coat of PVC glue to protect the leather. Now is my least favorite part of this entire project, making the scabbard. I have to apologize in advance though, because I am in no way a scabbard making expert. I really had no clues what I was doing. I was just winging the entire way. And so I also had no clues how to explain this entire process to you guys. So I have to skim through this part really quick because personally I thought this part was quite boring. Poco cantante, poco cantante, poco cantante. Ed invece del fandango una marcia per il fango, per montagne, per valloni, con le nevi e salioni, al concerto di tromboni, di bombarde e di cannoni, che le porre tutti i tuoni all'orecchio fan fischiar. Non più avrai quei pennacchini, non più avrai quel cappello, non più avrai quella chioma, non più avrai quell'aria brillante, non più avrai farfalloni amoroso. So we got the sword and we got the scabbard. The only thing left to do is the brass fitting on the scabbard. There's 3 fittings on the scabbard of the real sword. One at the beginning, which is called the locket, one in the middle, and one in the end, which is called the shape. So I made the paper prototype for this, just to make sure that I got the shape right before I cut out the actual brass sheet. After I was happy with the paper prototype, I used them as template to cut out the brass sheet. And of course, as always, we need to trim the edge. I used a hook blade to score out the decorative lines of the brass fitting. Then I attached a suspension ring to each of the brass fitting except for the shape. Now with a variety of tools such as the long nose pliers, the wooden dowel, and the handle of the hammer, I bend and curve the fitting to fit the contour of the scabbard. To close the fitting, I clamped the hinge slightly with the long nose pliers. And I did the same for the middle one. To close it, I punched a few holes along the seam of the brass fitting, and then I tied them shut with copper wire. And finally, the shape. I actually made a few prototype and failed prototype. Looks so ugly. So in the end, my best idea was to cut out the brass into this weird human shape And then with the wooden dowel, I curve it along the center. And I use flat nose pliers to bend and curve it at the same time to kind of roll this flat shape into the shape of a shape. And the shape is done. I thought it looked pretty decent. And as promised, I am redoing the pommel and also the blade. Foil gilding is such a game changer, and it's also pretty fun to do too. First, use a brush to apply a thin coat of gilding adhesive onto the object. Then you need to let the adhesive set for at least 30 minutes until it turns clear and tacky. This is crucial, so put your object aside while you work on something else. After that, you can now apply the gold leaves. Careful though, because each leaf is very light and delicate. Even a strong exhale can blow it away to pieces. Lay the foil on top of the adhesive. As long as your item is all covered, it doesn't matter how you put the leaves on. Now this is the fun but very messy part. Use a brush to burnish and remove the excess foil. I like to move the brush in circular and windshield wiping motion. Keep doing this until the surface is reflective and there is no flakes left on the surface of the object. Oh, and that is already significantly better than the spray paint version. The process is exactly the same for the blade, but with silver foil instead of gold. Although I said gold and silver, these are just imitation gold and silver foil for our project. They are not real gold leaf that fancy restaurants put on their desserts and charge people $500 for a plate, just for a few flakes of gold that you can't even adjust anyway. Although this is a fun process, I have to warn you though, after doing gilding, your entire room would be littered with flakes of gold and silver everywhere, no matter how tidy you work. It's the same as those pesky glitters. You'll be finding bits of them everywhere for the next few months. And also for this exact reason, it's a good idea to wear a mask so you wouldn't breathe in these very light and tiny flakes of metal. Well, this project definitely brought me out of my comfort zone. As you can see, I really struggled. I'm sure with the right tool and better preparation, this sword could have been done much faster and the process could have been much smoother. But with that said, I still love the end result. It is nice to have a challenge once in a while, and it is something that is completely different from anything that I've made on this channel so far. And of course, now I've got a cool sword to play with my king outfit and my crown. So